Hey guys, I'm Nic Collins. I'm a drummer. I play drums for Better Strangers, and I've played drums in the past for Mike and the Mechanics, Genesis, and my dad, Phil Collins. And you're listening to Stalwarts of Music.
Namaste, welcome to Stalwarts of Music with Aditya Veera. It is indeed an honor to have you as our first guest this new year, and I'm elated to have you on the show.
Amazing. Thanks for having me on, Adi, and I'm honored. I didn't know I was the first guest of the year. So thank you.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. And which part of the world are you in right now, and where are you at?
I I'm in Miami, in Florida. It's where I live.
Okay.
Down here in usually sunny South Florida. It's a bit cloudy and rainy today though.
Oh, okay. And what does your agenda look like today?
Today, I'm doing this, and then I'm heading over to the studio, which is Brain Damage Studios, which is owned by my good friend and bass player in Better Strangers, Yannick Weingarten. So I'm heading over there to do a bit of practice, work on a couple songs that I'm going to be doing some sessions for. So yeah, just kind of a normal, kind of busy day, not too much.
Interesting. And from what I've gathered, I believe you're a Manchester United fan.
I am, yeah. I've got the boys revving behind me. So yeah, it's
Nice.
tough times these days. I've been a United fan since I was a little boy,
Marvelous.
and yeah, it's been brutal the last 10 years. But
Sure.
it's the toxic relationship you can't get out of that you just they when you think you're done, they pull you back in. So yeah, it's
Nice.
turbulent times.
Well, I support Arsenal. Uh,
Also,
yeah.
you're having a great time.
No, I mean we would be if we finally win the season. Fingers crossed. Let's hope for the best.
hmm
Great. So let's just dive right into our agenda for today. I'd like to go back in time and talk to you about your childhood. Right? You grew up seeing your father both as a dad and as a global icon. Right? Right from when you were a little boy. Uh, and of course, you are a seasoned artist today. At what point did those two identities separate for you, and did that shift how you approached his music as something to study rather than just absorb?
Yeah, I mean, with my dad, I mean, some of my earliest memories came from watching him on his final farewell tour, which was like 2004-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was like the first time that that I remember
Okay.
seeing him on stage, and I had this I really loved. I mean, I loved the drums, and but like, before that, that I was like, there's these videos of me on like my dad's lap, like just tapping around the kit. But then they got me my first drum set when I was like 2 years old, 2 or 3, and then so I already kind of had like an attraction to the instrument, but then seeing my dad perform, he would start his show off with a drum solo, and then obviously then he would be singing for the most of the time, and I just really loved the interaction between him and the audience, the him and the band, just like everything that was going on. But I never really quite was like in my head thinking, oh my God, like why is dad famous? It was just happened to be my dad doing that thing. I didn't really put together the fact that there was all these people,
Right.
and why are they there? Um, but then, I think as you get older, you start to notice it more just as you're growing up. But my dad always did a great job of, separating the dad and then like Phil Collins, and that even when I started working for him,
Mm.
and touring with him, that was also very much a difference. Like at home, he was dad, and then once we were in the rehearsal room or on tour, of course, outside of sound check and being at the venue, we would hang out, and he would just be my dad. But when it was time to work, I really wanted it to be a working relationship in that, like, if something needed work or if something was wrong, like I wanted him to tell me and not to like treat me any differently because I was his son. Like treat me like you
Mm.
would anybody else in the band. Um, so like the beginning though, as I was growing up, like drumming and music was just something I enjoyed doing. It was like a hobby. I
Mm.
don't even know if it was a hobby. It was just like I liked doing it. I didn't really put that much thought into whether I would do it for a living or not. And then, as when I moved to Miami at like the age of 11,
Okay.
and then kind of into my teenage years, I was just playing more music, playing with different people, playing in different bands. And I was kind of like, you know what, like I think this is what I want to do. And yeah, and kind of that was kind of that point. And then obviously I was lucky enough to tour with him, to do have all these great opportunities, and like, all this exposure that really kind of just made me more and more into the idea of doing music. So I was kind of lucky to have that kind of progression into it and not just kind of thrown in the deep end. Well, I mean, I guess in some ways I was, but for at least emotionally it was kind of a gradual thing.
I think the credit goes to the two of you, right? Like in terms of your dad, making that delicate balance, that kind of separation between being a dad and, of course, uh, coming to work. It's a different ball game altogether. And you also were mature enough to understand that at a pretty young age, right? And as you
Hmm.
rightly pointed out, a lot of second generation musicians talk about doors opening in terms of the opportunities that you spoke about, but also the pressure, right, of being Phil Collins' son, right? So, talking about being on stage, was there ever a moment on stage when you felt you'd truly crossed from the tag of Phil Collins' son into simply the drummer?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know. Like I've had, it just depends on the different circumstance. I've had really rewarding times where I've been playing
Mm,
with my band, and we just happen to be at a place where these people don't know who I am. They just know there's a band playing.
mm,
And when you get a very positive reaction, and then people then after the fact find out that, my dad is who my dad is, that's a very rewarding and fun, cool feeling, because you
right.
really feel like you earned their not admiration, but you did that by yourself. You didn't do it because, like, and I'm very grateful that there's going to be a lot of people who will check me out or go to a show because they know that my dad is who my dad is. But when you
Mm,
do kind of get that organic, natural thing where people liked what you did and there was no kind of knowledge of the situation beforehand, I think that's really cool. As far as like being on stage, I mean, kind of like what you mentioned, like it is a kind of two-sided thing when you're kind of the son or the daughter of somebody who is either in that same field or just somebody who's like been very successful. And you know totally agree, like there's the doors that open,
mm-hmm.
but you're immediately like there's that positive, but then not everybody else is immediately compared to somebody who's sold millions and millions of records like when they're 16. But that's what that's kind of what it was. And it's like, let's see what you got. And in a funny way, I actually kind of really understood that mentality when I first got the gig. But I was a kid, so I was just wanting to, like, I'm going to use all that to prove people wrong. I'm going to do my homework and know the music so well that they're not going to have anything to say. And that was kind of a motivation for me to like really, come prepared and everything. So, as the tour started happening, I think the vibe was getting more that like I was there because I was doing a good job,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just being there because I was my dad's son. And to be honest, I don't think he would have allowed that. Like if I wasn't doing a
Certainly.
good enough job, and and the whole band, like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're total professionals, and if they didn't think I could do it, they would have told my dad, and there would have been words said of just like I don't think he's ready. So but I was lucky that the first time I played with my dad was like for a charity show, which was like 3 songs, then we did
Mm,
5. You know what I mean? It wasn't like immediately doing a tour, so we kind of got to try it out, and I got to kind of be exposed to that environment without it being so intense of like if this is a X amount of date tour and like there's a bunch of tickets sold. It was more like charity stuff and kind of just getting prepared for it.
mm,
So yeah, as the tours went on, I started kind of I guess earning a bit more of my own reputation as my own drummer that I am. And I think people started noticing that like my influences, although I have so much influence from my dad, I also have other ones that are different. So we're different drummers. We have a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences too.
True.
So I think now at this point, people, know that. And of course, you're going to have some people who still just know me as the son of, and that's totally fine, there's some people where yeah they're more into my band than they are like so they don't really care that I'm the son of whoever, you know what I mean? So it really just kind of depends on the situation. But I've tried make it a point where now I don't really let it bother me at all. Like my dad is I'm super proud of the career that he's had,
Right.
and I think that's great.
Mm,
And
mm,
I'm super grateful that his fans, some of them have an interest in what I'm going to do. Like, I'm just grateful for the support. Now, whether they end up not liking it because it's not my dad, like, I can't do much about that. Like, that is what it
mhm.
is. So, I know a lot of people, like, in similar positions to me, like, it bothers them a lot and they're constantly trying to fight this thing the whole time. And I'm like, well, I can't change who my dad is. My dad is who my dad is, and I'm proud of that. I'm not going to, like, all of a sudden start pretending like he isn't my dad so that, out of some sort of like, kind of self-respect chasing that I'm doing. So it's, it is one of those things, but I've kind of learned to live with it at this point.
Okay. Okay. I really admire the humility, Nick. You know, uh,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, yeah. It's wonderful to see what you've turned out to be from the little boy you were, right? Uh, in terms of an interview that you did with Ramio, you said that growing up, your dad didn't really talk about his drumming career at home ever, right? And in that interview, was there one technical or career detail about his playing that genuinely surprised you? Something that you'd probably misunderstood or never noticed before?
Um, Maybe not something that was like explicitly said in during the process. I did learn so much
Mm,
about him and about just the music. But I would say like the research going into that interview, where because originally with the Drumeo course, the Drumeo interview, we were also going to do a course with some of the
right,
music. So
right.
I really had to immerse myself into like, I don't know, 40 songs or something, and it was a lot of stuff, especially when you're trying to kind of teach them, like
Mm,
teach these parts,
mm,
you really have to kind of study the stuff in a different way. Um, and it was funny. I mean, the biggest thing I realized is him as a drummer is how really mainly expressive he was, and how big of a jazz influence was in his playing and just a
sure.
fusion, as well as like the rock thing. I
Right.
think I always just saw my dad as a rock drummer, but going into like the early Genesis stuff and even the Brand X
Brand
stuff, like
X,
really
yeah.
realizing
Yeah.
how much of a jazz and fusion influence was there. And that was what I had a tough time with, is I would be trying to learn stuff that he would
Mm,
do on a recording just to find out that that was just what he did on that particular take. So it
mm,
was almost like me learning exactly what he did was kind of against the point of what he had just done it because it was what felt right. And that was kind of, I learned how much of an expressive drummer he was and how much of his drumming was really a response to what he was playing with.
mm, mm,
And it was always just ideas. It wasn't like so thought out where everything is like composed. It was very much like a response between the drumming and the music. So that was really interesting. And yeah, just going through and hearing stories about how they wrote some of those really early songs, and that was kind of something even on the Genesis tour that I really enjoyed, was hearing the band side of my dad, because I
mm,
always
mm.
knew him and grew up with him as a solo artist. And
Okay.
so to hear the stories of him with like his buddies back in the day when they were like in their 20s and like going out and doing what I've done with my friends and my bands, like so it's like it was really cool to kind of be exposed to that side of him that I hadn't really known of because it was so long ago.
Mm, mm. Talking about Genesis, a lot of early Genesis drumming sits in a very rare space, right, between jazz fusion and rock, for instance. So when you're playing something like the cinema show, are you thinking more in terms of swing and phrasing or in terms of mathematical subdivision when you approach it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, with the Genesis stuff, I never was thinking any sort of math or counting or anything, because that is so not what that band is.
Mm,
Some bands are like that, like so, maybe you have like a band like a Dream Theater or those bands that are very intentional with the time signatures that they choose.
mm.
Genesis were not like that, and I remember even like a song like Firth the Fifth. I remember asking Tony Banks like what time signature it's in. He goes, I don't know. Like I just wrote this part because it was like some parts are like 15/16 and 17/16, like it's all this stuff, but it was really just like what felt good. And so to me, the approach to even to the prog stuff was like everybody had to be comfortable. And if I was sitting there counting and thinking about subdivisions, like I wasn't quite going to be that comfortable, and therefore, nobody else was going to be comfortable if I wasn't. So,
Mm.
because as a drummer, you are the foundation and the backbone. So, I wanted to make sure that I was good with my parts, that they could do their stuff, which was complicated. Some of the keyboard lines and guitar parts and bass parts are very complex. So, I wanted to give them like a foundation that was solid for that. So, when you mentioned Cinema Show, like that was one where the version we did was kind of based on the 80s version, which, based like is so different to the Selling England by the Pound version, which is very jazz fusion
Mm.
and very kind of chill and very swingy. Whereas as it got into the 80s, it got faster and faster and heavier. So it was, there was definitely that kind of, 7/8, I guess, fusion feel, but it was very kind of heavy hitting. It was like a bit of a kind of intense track when we would do the live show.
Okay.
So I wasn't necessarily, I guess, in the swing headspace. But that being said, I think to me the priority is always about how that song is going to feel, and I would go back to some of the studio versions or some of the live versions of the songs to try and kind of find the best of both worlds. Because the truth is, I had times where in rehearsal we did the song The Musical Box, which is
Mm.
like from like 1970 or 1971, and it was and I remember playing it and whipping out the kind of total prog fills and the
Right.
prog thing. And I remember Tony Banks literally saying, he goes, "Can you make it sound a little bit less 1971?" Like, he wanted it a bit more kind of modern. And that was kind of something that I think I was, at times would forget, and maybe the fans would forget that, like, for these guys, that's like 50 years ago. And maybe the versions that they're doing, and my mindset was, if I'm going to come in and do this, like I had to really study the most recent versions they had played of these songs, because
Mm.
that's
Mm.
what they were comfortable with. Like I wasn't going to start like go back in time 30 years to doing it a different way. Like there's a reason it went there, and I was coming in as the drummer. I wasn't the deciding factor and like calling any shots. I was trying to make everybody feel good with what they were doing. So it was that kind of compromise and push and pull of like what's great from the version they did most recently, and like what was lost from the studio version over a couple years, like that. There's a really cool part there that, drumming wise wasn't played anymore. Just stuff like that, and trying to find like the best of both worlds.
Within this context, interestingly, you mentioned that Tony Banks wanted to, have you do something modern, right? And have a little bit of your own flavor to it, right? And you are someone who's often mentioned that the chops must serve the song, right? So who
hmm
decides when the song is being served? Is it your internal compass, or is it the band who decides it, or is it the audience?
I mean, ideally, it's it's me or the drummer, or like, it's everybody's own internal compass, like you said.
Mm, mm,
That's the ideal situation. Of course, a band can always feel differently, or an artist, and if
mm,
if they have a problem with it, you'd hope they'd say it. You'd
mm,
hope they'd say it nicely so that you can fix it and it's not like you haven't upset them. But to me, the most important thing about being a drummer when you're even when you're in your own band or you're being kind of the main creative force, but specifically when you're playing for other people, is you got to be really attentive to what everybody is playing,
Mm.
attentive to like what the band is and who the band is. Like, some bands are going to be more like, let's do crazy chops and like go out there. Some bands are really like, I know some people where if a drummer starts overplaying, it's like they're almost like repulsed by it. Like they w really want the drummer to be playing the song and to be playing music, really. Um, and I think nowadays it's easy, and I found myself even having to kind of pull back the reins where I'm like, forgetting that I'm not playing drums for myself. Like you are in a way, but you're playing music.
Mm.
And so that's got to be the relationship is like I'm playing music. I'm not just playing drums. I'm
Right.
not just sitting here going like, oh, this was a cool chop or fill that I've been practicing in the rehearsal room because nobody cares. If it sounds bad, then it sounds bad. Like if you can whip something out that's like complex but just really fits the music and really impacts it, amazing. Like that's great. Best of both worlds. But the priority always has to be, in my opinion, the song
Mm.
and the music that you're playing. And so yeah, when it came to like, you know, Genesis, it was like that was more uh I had done my homework. I knew what the band kind of was and
Okay.
like,
Mm.
what would kind of like I wasn't gonna start doing a bunch of double kick stuff because that's not that band, and like
Mm.
that being aware of that and being attentive enough to pick up on small things like that are important.
Mm.
That being said, though, when I went and toured with Mike and the Mechanics, it was very different. He was like, obviously, I'm not trying to say I was doing any double kick stuff. Like I was being very specific to that pop rock sound, but
Mm.
he was more like, hey, know the songs, but you can kind of play whatever you want as far as the fills. Like there's a couple songs where the fills had to be important,
Right.
but like it wasn't like definitive night to night as opposed to maybe where Genesis and my dad like, I would try to kind of stick to something that I knew worked because
Mm.
the music was a bit more complex and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, it does depend where it comes from. It can always come from different sources, but ideally you've prepared enough and kind of are attentive enough that like you can determine what is serving the song and what is just kind of like and a big part of that you may not realize that in the moment, but recording yourself and looking back on footage or audio is a great key to like knowing whether it sounded good or not because in the moment you're so just focused on making sure you play it correctly that you may not even really pick up on whether it actually sounded good or not.
Mm. Mm. Yet another interesting facet that you just mentioned about the whole idea behind double kick stuff, right? So
Mhm.
what I've noticed is your single pedal speed often rivals modern double pedal players, right? So
Oh, that's really nice.
do you view this
Thank you.
as a philosophical choice? Is it preserving pocket and tone, or simply the most musically honest solution for your body?
Um, I mean, I think it depends what you grew up with.
Mm.
I grew up a single kick guy. Like
Mm.
my heroes, obviously it was my dad, then it was John
Right.
Bonham,
Right.
Taylor Hawkins, Dave
Yeah.
Grohl, Chad Smith, like all single
Right.
pedal guys.
Right.
So I never, I always thought if you're doing double pedal, it's like you're gonna have to do it for like some screamo death metal band, or else you don't need it. Because I
Mm.
would see drummers like do like the John Bonham triplets, like the good times, bad times, the decade to decade to bat. I would hear them do that with double pedal, and I was like, that's cheating. And that was me at like 15 years old, being like, oh, you can't do that.
Right.
Um, but then as I started getting more into progressive music, and I heard Gavin Harrison, and
Mm.
then I heard Danny Carey, and those two guys specifically, I was like, oh wow, you can use double kick in a more musical way, and it's like in more of like not it's not just speed, it's more like parts that you can't do with one foot but that
Mm.
aren't necessarily like just reserved exclusively for metal music. That was just part of my kind of maturing as a musician, and as I got into those two drummers and the bands they play for, Porcupine Tree and Tool, like I started then putting a double pedal on my kit
Okay.
and starting to get into that. And that's been the last 5 years or 4 years where it was a huge learning curve for me because I was just a single
Sure.
pedal
Sure.
guy,
Sure.
and I had like in a way, when you're just doing a single pedal, you end up getting pretty quick at it
Mm,
and pretty
mm,
good at it because you don't have another option.
right.
I will say, since I've had the double pedal, like you do maybe get a little bit lazy, and instead of doing the thing that you could do with just the one, you're like, well, I've got two here. I might as well just make my life easier and do it. And at the end of the day, I guess that's kind of the point in ergonomics. Like you're trying to make it as efficient as possible. So if it's more efficient to play it with two pedals because that's what you can do,
Mm,
then I guess it makes sense to do it. But yeah, the comfort though that I have with a single pedal is just because it's what I've been doing since I was 3 years old. Double pedal, I picked up when I was 19, like doing it for real, 19, 20 years old. That's a kind of learning a whole other instrument or a whole other part of your body that you weren't really doing. So it's very much still a work in progress for me. I've, incorporated it a lot in my band's music and in like, whenever I've done like some solos and stuff. So I enjoy it, but it's definitely not just comfortable. Like with like a single kick, I just feel I don't have to overthink it as much. Whereas like with two kicks, I do really have to, you know, focus on it to make sure it's played the way I think it should, you know?
mm, mm. And in terms of the whole John Bonham style of biomechanics, it's probably influenced how you structure a lot of these fills and transitions, right? So, how is it in terms of some of these heavier modern contexts like Better Strangers? Do you use a lot of Bonham style biomechanics?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way as a drummer, like your influences are always going to be there in different ways. There's just certain parts of songs or certain moments in life where you're leaning more in another direction or more towards, different kind of influences from the kind of music spectrum. I mean,
Hmm.
Bonham to me is always going to be that's foundation. It's the same thing, the same way that I look at my dad, same way that I look at Taylor Hawkins. Like to me,
Right.
that's me as a kid
Hmm.
learning how to play music, and I'll never be able to shake those foundations and those roots.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? But with Better Strangers, I do lean more towards like, if I had to compare it, yeah, I'm doing more of a Danny Carey thing or more of a, or trying to like take inspirations from guys like Mario from Gojira or
Okay.
Eloy from Slipknot. Like, so it is you are kind of seeing what the music needs and you are kind of leaning into a response to that, which is going to be kind of the heavier side of music that I listen to and the more progressive side as well. Um, but that being said, I have, there's so many drummers that are always influencing, different areas of my playing, like, and they don't have to exclusively be from like, heavy music. Like, Jeff Porcaro from Toto is one of
Total.
my all-time favorite drummers as well.
Nice.
And, the same way as with John Bonham. So like if you're throwing that in as a response to like some heavy music, like that creates a really cool contrast.
Mm.
And or I'll take a big amount of influence from Larnell Lewis from
Mm.
Snarky Puppy.
Snarky puppy.
He's one of the greatest drummers out there. So there's every influence is present at a certain moment. But it just depends on what you're gonna kind of lean more towards and yeah, it's always kind of it's always just adding to who you are as a drummer, and that's kind of the beauty of it. Like you're just kind of you keep adding all these different spices to this thing, and it just like some of them become more present at different times.
And I think, like you rightly mentioned, leaning towards different influences at different circumstances, or even different projects, right, where you are catering to a certain kind of sound, and that's why the evolution of these phases happen. So I can very much relate to what you said in terms of that.
Hmm.
Another interesting facet is your father played a left-handed kit, and so many of his classic Tom fills naturally move from right to left, right? So, as a right-handed drummer, did you have to relearn those parts with different stickings to preserve the feel, or did you find a way to adapt that left-handed flow onto a right-handed setup, especially while playing classics like In the Air Tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had a basic mirror image of his kit just on
Right,
the other side.
right.
Yeah, for his tour and the Genesis tour, I pretty much, I had the same amount of toms
Mm,
because a big part of that sound was in the drums. And so with my band and, even with Mike and the Mechanics, totally different kit.
mm,
Some concert toms with my band, but it's mainly bigger double-headed toms. But with my dad, it was very much like you got to play this kit to get that sound. Like In the Air Tonight doesn't sound right on a
mm,
double-headed kit. You need the concert toms. You need a borderline be kind of rim shotting them,
right.
and that's just how you get that sound. So. Luckily, when I just kind of mirrored it, I didn't really have to think too much about the stickings. But one thing that I definitely, picked up on by watching old live videos would be how he, some of his fills, like studying his tendencies. And that
Mm,
was kind of like when I was talking about being attentive, is like, if you're just kind of playing what kinds of fills did he play that
mm,
made sense to this song? And so it's not necessarily you have to do those exact fills, but knowing the headspace and almost kind of putting on a different hat and leaning more towards that influence or that direction. So I'd have different fills on the 80s stuff where he would do a lot of like in between the cymbals and toms, like stuff like that that I would never kind of do. So trying to pick up on that and kind of how can I, either how can I play it, how can I incorporate it? And also that ended up being that I would start throwing that into my own music, which was really cool because that's kind of the thing that I think is a super beneficial tool because look, at the end of the day, drumming luckily, I remember hearing this from Taylor Hawkins, who's like a hero of mine, and I
right.
remember him telling me that he goes, "Dude, drumming is just a huge garage sale." He goes, "I can't tell you how many things I've stolen from Roger Taylor and from your dad." And that just stuck with me. It is. It's just a garage sale. Like you're going, "Oh, that's cool. I like that, Phil. Let me throw it in." And learning those songs and learning, whether it's great music or learning from great drummers, like that gives you so much of a foundation, and you can then pick what you like, what you don't like, and it's just like to me, that's just a great way of being exposed to different things when you're actually learning them. And so, a lot of fills or grooves and beats that I was learning for the Genesis tour, ended up being almost practice tools for me to then incorporate them either in my own playing or change things up. But it's like, hearing other drummers is a great way to kind of be exposed to a certain, style or fill and like, kind of motivate you to incorporate that in your own playing.
Mm, mm. Another tour, which is the on the Not Dead Yet tour, you stepped away from the drums to play piano on You Know What I Mean while your father sang. Did taking on that melodic role give you a new perspective on his songwriting that you wouldn't have had just, while playing drums?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I definitely think that learning whether it was that song or just throughout, my life, learning different songs of his on piano,
Mm, mm.
he approaches piano as a drummer, like it's a percussive kind of thing, and I also learned from him, and it was very similar to me. It's a lot of it is muscle memory and
Okay.
what feels good, and so that song, you know what I mean. I remember sitting there and learning it, and then he wanted to lower the song like a half step down. And I'm like, well, I can't learn it a half step. I've learned it this way. This is the way it is. So we had to transpose it on the keyboard. But
Right.
because a lot of it was based on where my hands were and what would be the muscle memory of
Sure.
doing it, to the point where one night we had like a mishap. I think somebody must have accidentally hit the
Oh
split
no.
button on the keyboard.
Okay.
So half the keyboard was transposed and half the keyboard wasn't, and it was
Shit.
also like an upright bass.
Right.
So I just remember panicking and like moving everything up an octave. But just even that, oh, I got halfway through a part and I froze. I'm like, this doesn't feel right anymore. And I couldn't really kind of look at the notes and go, oh yeah, it's an E flat and it's going to this. Like that just wasn't happening in my head.
Right.
So we had to stop and start again, which was, it was a great moment. It was funny. It bothered me a lot. And now I look back and laugh on it, and I shouldn't have been that bothered. But at the time, I was just, I felt like the ground could swallow me up. Like I was so embarrassed. But, to answer your question, yeah, I think he approaches it very percussively,
Okay.
and kind of from that standpoint. And I, it's funny how different you can, how like being on stage behind a drum set to me is very comfortable. I feel like I've got my shield of stuff that, you know,
Mm.
is protecting me from the outside world and everything. And then the minute I then go to the piano, I would just get so nervous. Like significantly more nervous to play this 2-minute ballad than I was to play like the In the Air Tonight fill. You know
Okay.
what I mean? Like stuff like that because it wasn't my comfort zone.
Mm.
And I guess a big part of that came from the fact that, if I'm playing drums and I make a mistake,
Mm.
I, for most of the time, know how to maybe correct it or sound like it wasn't a mistake. I mean, obviously, sometimes it is what it is and you messed up. But I think a lot of, musicians will relate to when it's like their instrument that they're comfortable with. Like there's like tips and tricks where they feel comfortable where, they can, they stay, they don't let something throw them off completely. Whereas like on piano, any bad note or like that moment, it was like I always felt like I was this close from falling off the
Mhm.
rails. You know what I mean? So I definitely have, I had that respect for it's funny how like different instruments and people who commit to that instrument, like how comfortable they get with that. And like, so I guess the same way I feel about the drums would be the same way that a keyboardist feels about keyboards or piano. But just like for me to then go to that, I was like, I don't know how you do this. Like your fingers can slip and like you're then hitting a bum note. Like you're just like things like that that I think, I think probably every musician thinks about for other instruments. But it was interesting to actually be there and having to deal with it.
Nice.
Just like you never left, just as I long to be lonely. You call up to tell me you're not sure if you're ready. Are you ready or not? You take what you got and you leave. Only me alone with my heart. Putting the pieces back together again. Just only me alone with my dreams. I can do without you. You know what I mean.
Yeah, very. I mean, must have been really hard, when you had to beat yourself that much at that age. But yeah, I'm so glad that you're laughing about it today, and you've come
Yeah,
a
you
long,
got
a
it,
long
man.
way.
You can't. I mean, even at the time,
Yeah,
like it was
yeah,
now, you mess up, and obviously, look, nobody likes to mess up, but
right,
there are times where it happens, and that's human. Like that's
yeah,
how it is. That's the
right,
beauty of why, in my opinion, you'll never be able to replicate a human's feel with like AI or anything. It's because like
totally,
every now and then you'll have those moments, and usually fans love it and
mm,
audiences love it, and
right,
and significantly more than what the artist is feeling. The artist thinks he's, it's like terrible and it's like, it's very embarrassing. Whereas like, when this happened, the whole audience started laughing and like thought it was great. I was kind of like sitting there going, of course, I've said the keyboard's messed up. Nobody in this arena believes me. They just think I messed up. You know what I mean? But
right,
so it's all fun. You got to look back on it, you know, uh, with humor.
nice. Uh, Another interesting thing is your integration of linear gospel derived phrasing into rock music. It feels like a generational update to the Collins Tom language, right? So do you see linear drumming as ornamentation or as a new form of melodic narrative?
I mean, I think it's great. I've never really thought about anything specifically, whether it was linear or not. I'm
Mm,
still kind of learning what that really means.
mm,
I would
mm,
just a lot of the time hear something cool, or I would take a triplet fill and then turn it into a groove. Like so, I have like a song with my band that is based around a kind of left right kick, right left, like kind of inverting the singles in between the kicks. um, which was a fill that like my dad originally taught me, and something that I'd been playing for ages, and turning that into a groove all of a sudden then kind of made it very linear because it was like that kind of triplet feel with this very specific sticking, which was then creating a groove, which I thought was very cool. So, but at the end of the day, I think it's always, if it sounds good and if it sounds cool, then great. Like it doesn't really matter whether it was linear or not. I think that is a huge part of drumming nowadays, it seems. I think from the influence of gospel guys and gospel chops, you're hearing a lot of more kind of modern drummers really
Mm,
incorporate that into their playing. And at the end of the day, I think it just comes, like it comes from what you grew up listening to or what you also like grew up studying or practicing along to. So you can tell that like there's some guys who play and you're like, oh yeah, you're totally, I can tell you've been brought up on the gospel chops and the guys like, Aaron Spears or Eric Moore, like those kind of great drummers. But then you'll hear a guy where it's like, oh no, you're all Bonham. Like I can hear like there is no kind of gospel chop, as in linear kind of sticking. It's just like a completely kind of different thing. So I do think it's kind of like what I was talking about. There's so many different inspirations to draw from different guys and things that they do.
mm.
Um, but it does definitely, I guess, seem that it's become more like just it's just used more often, I think, now in drumming. But I think for me, with like the way, I guess, my dad, when we were talking about that sticking the right left kick, right left, um the like that thing has been more, I've heard him do it throughout kind of his drumming. So I
Okay.
wouldn't say it's necessarily totally kind of, I guess, different, except when, I've then kind of stripped it back and turned it into a groove where then it turns into kind of a very linear thing. I guess it's hard for me to really describe it when I don't even really fully understand what linear means. You know what I mean? Like I don't really come from like a super music theory or studied like background. So it's interesting. It's like a very different kind of approach on when I'm listening or learning parts.
Right, right. Another thing I wanted to ask you, Nick, was in a lot of instrumental contexts, the drums effectively becomes the lead voice, right? So in such situations, how do you avoid over articulation while still driving the harmonic motion?
Yeah, that's a great question, and honestly something that I'm still figuring out now. Like, currently with Better Strangers, we're doing stuff instrumentally at the moment.
Mm,
I think ideally we'd love to have a singer. But that isn't the case right now. And instead of not doing anything, we'd rather do something.
okay.
Um, and when you're in that context, it does completely change the way you approach parts. Like when there's a vocalist, it's a completely different headspace. Like I'm playing the song, I'm playing the music. When there is no vocalist, you know that you kind of and in a way nowadays instrumental music, I think of bands like Animals as leaders, or the great guitar player Pliny, like
Yeah.
those that type of music is almost every 10 seconds there's something that's coming out that is kind of retaining your attention.
Mm,
And that was a tough thing for us because the three of us, me, Joey, and Yang, like we grew up listening to bands that had vocalists, and our
right.
approach to writing music was very, very different in that like it wasn't about doing a fill every like bar or doing a crazy guitar part. It was more like serving the foundation for a top line to then go on top of that. So
Mm,
now being instrumental, you then go, okay, like, well, I guess we need to start writing music that is retaining people's information. And like, over the last few years, we started going in a direction where we were just getting more progressive, and we were getting influenced by, bands like Tool or the Mars Volta, those kind of more progressive, yet also had a singer on them. So it was that kind of balance. So when we didn't have a singer, I'd find myself plenty of times like overthinking the drum parts. Even not even like playing, when I was saying you got to play music versus play the drums, like I'd find myself like almost like in a different space to the rest of the guys because I'm just trying to think about like I've got to do this fill correctly and I've got to play and how is it feeling. Whereas like when there's a vocalist, nobody's really gonna pay that much attention to like the tiny fill you did at like minute three because they're listening to the vocalist. But when there is none, you do feel like you've got to carry a bit more responsibility. And so I think what I've tried to do is remember that we're playing music and we aren't those bands that I mentioned. Like, we're not, I don't, I mean, I'm not trying to be self-deprecating. I don't think we're good enough to be animals as leaders because we're not those kinds of technical beasts that
Mm.
those guys are, like they're just, it's almost like unhuman what they're doing. It's so unbelievably impressive. So for us, it's like remembering, well, that isn't us, and what we like about our stuff is this other element. So let's make sure we preserve that. And I've tried to kind of make sure to rein myself into being like, well, you're playing the song, and of course, there's always going to be place like there's always going to be space for more complex parts, and a lot of our songs do have complex parts, but making sure you approach them with that musical intent rather than just being like, look what I can do, look at this cool fill or this cool chop, and because you're not playing to like the potential two drummers that are in the audience, if any,
Mm.
you really want to be playing to the kind of general listener and what's
Right.
going to serve the song the best. So it is kind of a push and pull, and some songs will ask for more emphasis on the kind of technical side, and some songs will just ask for something that's more straight ahead, and that's okay. And I think for me, kind of remembering that. If it's a good song, it's a good song. Instead of playing, like, instead of determining whether I want to play something based on how difficult my part is, let me just play it because it's a good song. You know what I mean?
No, sometimes what I personally feel is there is a lot to carry from simplicity as well, right? Like a simple song, if you had to take the Beatles or any of those bands, right? Uh, there is a lot to carry from simplicity in itself.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Right, and yeah, and I think yeah a lot of people appreciate that, at least in today's day and age. uh, a lot of them admire simple music, at least majority of people out there like to appreciate things that are simple rather than too complicated to understand or comprehend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I obviously, obviously, I think, the type of band we are at the moment, being instrumental, being a bit more progressive, like you also got to know your niche
Mm.
audience for who's gonna kind of buy into that. And I think that's usually where you're like, that you then end up comparing yourself to the other instrumental
Right,
progressive bands.
right.
Um, because it's a different thing to like, what's happening on top 40 radio, for example. But,
Mm.
I've had times where I kind of go, yeah, this complicated thing's very cool, but I'm like, but I could kind of listen to Jeff Porcaro just lay down a shuffle, or I could listen to Steve Jordan lay down a groove and get more excitement and more feeling out of that.
Of course.
So it is kind of that kind of, you need that reminder into that sometimes the simplicity is good and is, it is what's working for the majority of the world for a reason. So it's okay to go into that and to take parts of that, even if the rest of the song is complicated, having those moments where you do rein it back, like it does help connect um, the audience to the music in a kind of different way, where it's no longer just like watching, you're actually kind of more a part of it and feeling it a bit more.
Another thing I must really admire is the fact that you left a commercially positioned project like The Effect to refocus on Better Strangers, which suggests a prioritization of authorship over visibility. Right? So, was that a decision which was intuitive and difficult for you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was an interesting, it was a very difficult decision for me to make. I mean, like you said,
Right.
like there was a lot of things that were going for that band
Mm.
at the time. The truth is I just came to a place where it was taking time away from what I wanted to do. And I felt I was a little too young to just give up on really what I wanted, just to kind of, for, I guess, for because the band was doing well.
Mm.
Um, it's one of those things where I'm extremely proud of my involvement in that project. I think
Right.
we wrote some great songs, and Trev and M specifically wrote some great songs. I kind of I responded to what Trev was writing, you
Mm,
know, and we had a really kind of fun time, and I'm really grateful for the experiences we did. And I think it's a great album. Like I'm really proud that I got to be a part of it. It's just, sometimes bands don't work out the way they're gonna. There's so many different factors to being in
mm,
a band. It's not just as straightforward as like playing music. Like it's people's time and their commitment and their energy that is going into it. So, everybody's got to be kind of on the same page. And, it's one of those things that it wasn't meant to be. And, I was able to kind of focus a bit more on my projects. And, I've had stuff where with my projects, things have fallen apart and fallen through the cracks. And, it's a bummer, but there's always kind of an experience or kind of a lesson to be learned for any kind of experience that you kind of go through.
mm, mm. And if you had to compare these two projects in terms of the effect, you were supporting strong vocals and tight, strong structures, while Better Strangers gave you more space in the instrumental prog-leaning material. If I had to put it into one of those categories. So how does your approach to serving the song change when the drums are helping lead the story versus anchoring a vocalist?
Yeah, I mean that's it. It is a very different approach. I mean,
Mm,
both bands are very, very different
mm,
because with the effect we were playing, we had a click and we were playing to tracks. And, we had some live shows where it was really just me, Trev, and Emmett. And so bass and keyboards had to be going through track, which, isn't, I think, ideal for a drummer, but it was the situation we were in. And so the approach changes very much. It's very different because you're playing the song.
mm.
The main event is not the drumming, it's the vocals or it's the
Right,
guitars and like
right.
and so my job was to more be that anchor and that foundation, especially when you're playing along to a click of like being just solid and consistent. I mean, Trev was cool and let me do a lot of like, kind of big moments or big fills or kind of explore different rhythmic ideas. And it was never just kind of like just do this. It was, he was encouraging different things. Um, but you always approach them knowing that you're supporting the song. Whereas the kind of with Better Strangers, there's no clicks. It's
Mhm,
very much free flowing. It's very much us responding to each other. And I think, at the end of the day, with the effect, I was wearing a hat, the same way that I've worn hats to play with my dad or to play with Mike and the Mechanics or,
mm,
those different things. Whereas with Better Strangers, it was more like this is just me as a drummer.
mm,
I'm not really thinking about what was going to be appropriate for the band. I'm just like, this is what I want to do, or just my response to the music. So,
mm.
and also like, with Joey and Yang, we've been best friends since I was 14, 13 years old. So
Wow, quite some time.
it's like, yeah, we've grown up together and
Right.
there is that kind of bond and, friendship that is there. And to me, it's there in the music as well because we've grew up as musicians together. So the reason we don't need to have a click is because you know we've become so we've become tight as a band, but we've become so like aware of people's of each other's tendencies
Mhm,
that sometimes you'd put a click on it and it was like, oh no, like that cool thing, that cool aspect has gone away. We've had times where, especially, like I was mentioning, like you're comparing yourself to instrumental bands that are so perfect, and
mm,
so we'd be in the studio and we'd be doing one take with a click track and one take without it, and we'd always kind of start leaning towards the ones without because it felt like it had that push and pull, like that some of our favorite bands like Tool have and Led Zeppelin and those kinds of things. So, um, yeah, it was just very different kind of projects, I guess, at the end of the day, and different headspaces to be in when you're kind of playing drums and taking more of a lead role when it's just an instrumental trio, because everybody is almost playing lead bass, lead guitar, lead drums. You know what I mean? As opposed to the effect, which was more kind of conventional band setup, where the drums are really the anchor and the foundation for the song.
mm, mm. As part of the latter effort, which is Better Strangers, uh, talking about approach, your approach might have changed after the vocalist left, right? So, how much of a composer did you become than just being a drummer when that transition took place?
Yeah, I mean the great thing about our setup is everything's always been collaborative.
Mm,
So I don't come in, I can play guitar, bass, and piano, but I don't come in with guitar ideas.
right.
Um, because to me, that's Joey's. Like, I'm not going to be able to play guitar like him. So,
Mm, mm,
and his response to what me and Yannick are doing is going to be what makes something special, and kind of the same thing for everybody. So, like, everybody usually sticks to their own instrument when we come in, but nobody has ever really come in with a fully written song of
mm,
like here's 4 minutes, you guys do this. It's very much we kind of need each other to kind of, oh, we're starting to go in this direction, or like I need to hear what Yannick and Joey end up doing together for me to really know what I want to do. And everybody, it's a very kind of democratic process. Everybody's going like, yes, that's good, no, don't like that, on each other's parts, and nobody kind of has an ego,
mm,
because at the end of the day, we're trying to create something that the three of us all are really passionate about.
right.
That does end up meaning that it takes us longer to write music, and we've learned not to force stuff, because when we were younger, we would just write. There'd be a cool idea, and then you're kind of like, well, we need to finish this today. So what's the chorus? What's the bridge? And like, and then you're kind of almost you're left with something that you're like, well, one part was cool, but the rest kind of sucks because we rushed it, as opposed to now we've had, we still go through ideas that have been around for years
Mm,
that just need a different time to be that, like, you connect with it differently at a different time. So
right.
um it is a very kind of collaborative up process. And if as far as like the question about me being a composer, I mean, it's we've all kind of been the composers of the music. It's just very different when you don't have a singer, because a lot of the times when you have a singer, you can kind of go, well, we can just go back to this part or
Mm,
this section of the song. um Whereas when maybe you're instrumental, you don't really have that luxury of doing that, because you don't have a singer who's going to sing the chorus. You've got to do something that's different, because if not, you're just going to be repeating yourself. So it does end up kind of going in a bit of a different headspace, but that's just kind of part of the process.
mm, mm. Uh, I would also like to kind of dive into a little more of the technical aspect, right? When you play extreme tempos, what tells you that you've crossed the line from musical intensity into mechanical excess?
um That's a great question. I mean, I think the minute you're thinking about what you're doing,
Mm,
um, and you're no longer actually kind of really paying attention to what else is happening around you, I think that seems to be a good kind of sign of like, this may be too much, or maybe it's just going into it's just, I mean, sometimes it's okay to go into the more mechanical side of things. I mean, there's so many bands that we listen to that do that, and it's really cool.
mm,
Whether there's bands like Meshuggah who will sometimes go into something where you're like, I don't even know what's happening, but it's awesome. We do love that as well. So there is a time and place where some things can be appropriate. But I think it's easy to know when either when you're playing it or when you're listening back to something that you've created, where something just snaps, takes you out of it. Like, I think a lot of good songs, you're in a bit of a trance for the majority of the song, and you're trying to carry over that same energy or enthusiasm from the beginning all the way to the end. And there'll be some times where in a song, all of a sudden you've done something, and like it'll snap you out of it, and that's kind of usually a good way to tell that that part's not working, and
mm,
maybe I need to rein it back. And also, I think listening back to stuff is extremely important, because it's just a different headspace when you're performing it or playing it versus listening to it. And so I've had times where playing it, I'm going, oh, it's boring, I need to do something else, whereas actually, the simple version was what was, feeling better when I was just listening to it. So there is always kind of like that kind of line where maybe you overstep, and it's like, oh, now we're thinking too much. Or, to me, it's a big thing is like time signatures. Like whenever the band has had songs where we're counting and we're going, so what if we do this one in seven, and then
mhm.
like let's add another two beats, and it'll be a nine the next time. And it's like, now we're doing math, now we're counting, and nobody's having a good time anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you could tell the guitar player Joey's like counting something, and I'm having to do an extra little hit because it's in nine. So it's like to me, when we're doing odd time stuff, it's because that riff happened to be in that time signature, and what we're doing is happening to be. It's like it just ends up feeling the best in that time signature, as opposed to consciously going, "This is in five" or "This is in seven." It's more like, "Oh, I didn't know that, but that part's in five." It's like it's a different kind of approach to it.
Mm. And talking about talking a little more about time signatures, a lot of drummers telegraph these odd time signatures, but yours seems quite disguised. If someone were to listen to it, from that particular angle, right? So, yeah, is that an intentional choice to hide the math behind motion and flow for you, Nick?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm maybe not necessarily trying to hide it, but I definitely think that the priority to me is if it feels good.
Mm.
So, and to me, 5, 7, like there's some grooves and songs that I've heard in those time signatures or in nine where they feel better than 4/4. Like, so I'm not trying to say that it has to be 4/4. So many of most of my band songs are in odd time now. Um, and that's great, but I'm always trying to make sure that as a listener or as somebody who's playing it, there's got to be a movement and a feeling to it, as
Mm.
opposed to it being like counting and or snapping you out of it every couple bars because it's like, you know, to me, I think a big part is I very rarely will play a time signature intentionally with my band
Okay.
where it's something over 16, where it's like it's we'll do a lot of 7/8, 9/8, 11/8, 10/8, obviously, 7/4, 9/4, all those things as well. But we don't really ever do something over 16. Like the only songs that I can think of that were over 16 were like Firth of Fifth when I was touring with Genesis. But like we were talking about, like the intention was never for it to feel that way. It was more like this just happens to be in that part, and you're kind of trying to smooth out the whole process so that it feels good and isn't too overwhelming to an audience. And I think there's usually a kind of easy way to tell. Like usually good songs that are like songs that use odd time signatures that are good. Usually it's because the part, like the guitar part or the main riff or the lead line is in that time signature, but you can tell it's played in that time signature. It's not like they've had to adapt a part to make it fit a certain amount of numbers,
Mm.
and so fortunately for with Better Strangers, like Joey would come in with some ideas that were in 7/8 and maybe not necessarily intend for that to be the case, but that would just be what the riff is, and I would respond to that riff. And usually when you're responding to something, that's usually when it ends up feeling more natural because it's a natural response to it, as opposed to me coming in being like, check it out guys, I have this double kick idea that's in 13. That's going to be very hard for them to then write something that fits that. And I've actually, we have a couple songs where they started off with drum patterns. Um, but the majority of the odd time, maybe barring like one song, the majority of the odd time songs come from Yannick or Joey coming in with a riff that is in that time signature because we've just found that when they're responding to the drumming, it then starts to feel way too intentional as opposed to it being more musical.
Especially while blending acoustic drums with triggers in a lot of Genesis material. Uh,
Mhm.
what's your rule for deciding when the electronic sound leads versus supports?
Um, I mean, that's really something that was kind of exclusive to the Genesis tour and my dad's tour. Kind of Mike and the Mechanics had it as well. Um, some songs just had that classic 80s, almost like Simmons kit sound,
Mm.
and so it was important to replicate it. I think electronics and drumming are very powerful and can really change your approach to playing a part or playing a song because you're
Right.
responding to the sound. And so we'd have times where there'd be a big gated sound on the snare or the toms, and you end up playing completely differently because you're really responding to the sound that it's creating. And so the same thing with the Simmons pads too. Like you end up doing way more kind of like those kinds of fills because that's just what fits the sound. I found it was really interesting and challenging to go from playing songs that were just complete acoustic drumming to triggers, because you can't do any ghost notes, because then you'll maybe get a double trigger on one of them. Like you do end up approaching the songs a bit differently, but I thought that was kind of a cool kind of challenge for me to kind of approach. Um, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, like responding to a sound when it comes to using triggers or electronics is can create a very cool musical thing that maybe is not usual when you're just using acoustic drums, because you feel like you need to fill up a bit more space. Like there's times where just kind of hitting a kick and snare with a good sound can kind of feel more, can feel better than just like having to fill it up with a bunch of acoustic stuff, if that makes sense.
And how often do you use an electronic drum kit? Are you accustomed to playing that often, or you prefer the acoustic
I don't
way?
own an electronic kit. I've thought about it because I live in an apartment and it would be,
Uh,
convenient,
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. But I've always been an acoustic drum guy. I mean, to me, I like electronics when they sound like when it's intentionally electronic. I don't like uh, electronic drums that are trying to emulate real drums, because to me that always sounds weird and wrong.
Mm, mm,
When it's a Simmons kit, or when it's like an effect, or there's a trigger that's like, um, being blended with the real acoustic sound, I think that can be really great. And there's an artistic kind of intention behind it. Um, Whereas, like, replacing a snare drum, even I kind of feel this way as well about like kind of like when we're recording, like sample replacing parts for like a sample or a stock kind of snare drum sound. I'm like, it's okay, but like it doesn't feel the same or sound the same as the real thing.
mm.
Um, so that's always been kind of my approach to like the electron. I don't really use enough of like actual electronic drums now. I do a lot of like different pads and trigger bars that'll either trigger actual sounds, or it'll trigger just like, subs or 808 pads and stuff like that. But that being said, I may get an electronic drum set for more of like a practice reason, but I think as far as like actually playing and performing, I don't see myself going away from the acoustic drums.
Okay. Uh, is it right to put it this way? Do you believe that control is ever fully attainable in live rhythm, or the illusion of control itself is part of the performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I think to an extent you can control. There's definitely a way to control everything. I mean, the easiest way is you put a click track, and all of a sudden you're going to get a lot more control than you maybe thought. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to like the amount of time you're going to put into your practicing, or that side of things. But with a click track, you do kind of, you almost, and I've really enjoyed playing with click tracks before in a live situation. I didn't we didn't do click tracks for Genesis or my dad, but I did them with the effect, and I did them for Mike and the Mechanics, and I do like that the idea, you've completely eliminated the question of was that too fast or was that too slow from like the artist. Like, so I think that's great, because I'm here to just play, for Mike and the Mechanics, I'm here to play their songs. So I don't really want to start dealing with like, oh, I played that too fast or too slow. Whereas with my band, like we've kind of decided to not do clicks, and that there's just a different kind of push and pull to the music, and in that way control is not, in my opinion, is just not attainable. Like you're a human being without a click track, it's not going to be perfect, like unless you're just a freak of nature. Like it's just not like, and I've found that that's okay. Like there's a lot of my favorite bands and albums that don't have a click, and I never thought about it. I just was like, this is good. It feels good, and there you go. Like, but it just depends on the musical context, though, because I do think that for a pop gig, when there's a lot of moving parts and the priority is more either the top line, the
Mm.
vocalist, or whatever, I do think that click helps, because everything's going to be tight. Everything's going to just feel exactly the way it should. And it's like a steam train just going, as opposed to where it's, if I went to go see Tool and they were playing a clicks, I'd be like, why? Like what are you doing this for? Same thing with like bands like Foo Fighters or bands like the Chili Peppers, like who, to my knowledge, didn't play with click.
Mm.
That was the beauty and thing that that band had. Whereas like if I go and see um, a big pop show, do I want the chorus and the verses to start going like that? Like probably not, but it really just depends on the kind of on the circumstance and the situation. So I would say that control can be attainable when you're playing with clicks and you're really, you're prepared and you've done your homework. But also stuff is always just going to happen. We're human. You're never going to eliminate the probability that something could happen and that it's never just going to be 100% perfect. So without a click and when you're just actually playing music and you're a group of human beings interacting with each other, there's no control, and that's the beauty of it, of like that side of it.
Fair enough. Uh, in terms of time signature, at what point does a time signature cease to be counted and become felt? And how do you train your body and not your intellect to cross that threshold?
I think the main element for me would be what you're playing along to. Like as a drummer,
Mm,
if you're playing along to a song that's got a very obvious riff or hook or melody that isn't an odd time, but it's very obvious and it's musical, it's to me it's an easier process of not you don't end up counting and you don't end up having to think about it. There's a natural kind of pulse
mm,
and rhythm that instrument or that part is kind of giving you that you can respond to.
mm,
um but there's that's never going to be 100% the case. I remember when we were talking about doing the drumeo thing, I remember having to learn um robbery, assault, and battery
mm,
um from Genesis, and I just couldn't understand that bridge. Like I think it was in like 13 or something. Like I just remember like I couldn't get it. To me, there wasn't anything that was anchoring it, and I was really having to count all the way up, which
mm,
that is always kind of feels a little bit like a drag. And in a way, I think for me, I'm not like I don't read music, so a big part of the learning process for me is like spending time with a song and like really knowing it that way as opposed to just charting it out. Like I do need to kind of sit with it and listen to it. um so maybe after over a certain amount of time of listening to that song enough, I would have gotten very comfortable with it. But with in that situation, I just that comfort wasn't quite there. So to me, when I'm counting something, it just kind of means I'm not that comfortable yet with it. um there are going to be times where something just kind of stays tricky and you don't understand it necessarily, but you're playing for an artist and it just is what it is. And counting can be a very good tool to save what you're doing. And I do, despite me saying that I don't think you should be counting while you're playing, I think I do think it's very important to count at the beginning of the learning process, just to know what you're doing and what it is. Sometimes that can be counterintuitive because it all of a sudden confuses you more, but I find that more often than not, once you know what the time signature is, for example, I've played enough songs in seven where I kind of know what fills or what grooves or what patterns are going to work in seven. So when I'm listening to a song and I figure out it's in seven, I go, okay, cool. That as a as a little kind of um, a little kind of cheat code has kind of, because I know it's in seven, I know certain things are going to work for that groove or for that song. So I do think there are ways to kind of use it, but I think for the majority of the time, ideally you're responding to the music as opposed to consciously trying to count out what's happening.
mm, mm. How does spirituality inform your life as a musician?
Wow, I mean that's a great question. I mean, I guess to me, I mean, I'm probably still kind of figuring that out. I think everybody has a different reason why
Right.
they play music and different reason why they play drumming. And I think staying true to that is really important. And you can kind of relate that to spirituality if you want, but I think, having clear intention behind what you're doing and kind of knowing why you're doing it and knowing that your path is kind of different to it's not the same as everybody else's. Everybody has their own path because everybody's got their own interest as to what they want to do and what they want to accomplish on the instrument, you know. So I think knowing that and staying true to that is kind of a very important thing. And also kind of letting that aspect of life or just spirituality, like, flow into the music in some way, whether that's in response to other, parts, or whether that's just creating your own songs. Like I think there's plenty of ways that it can, that can come to the forefront in your music.
Mm. In the interest of time, I'd like to come to the last part of our agenda, which is a quick rapid fire.
Hmm.
You don't have to think way too much. You can be as spontaneous as you want to be with your answers. First question for you, Nick. What is that one song that always makes you cry?
One song that always makes me cry. Oof, dude, that's a tough one. I've got to like now I gotta feel like I gotta like go through my playlist. One song that makes me cry. I mean, for a while there was a Tool song called "The Patient" that for a while would kind of get me near the end, but I would probably say a song that makes me cry is it would be Genesis "Fading Lights," because that's just their last song with my dad on that album, and so just for because of the personal connection, that always kind of pulls on the heartstrings a little bit.
Lovely. On the contrary, do you have a favorite guilty pleasure song?
Oh man, I mean, I love. Oh, okay. I really there's some great 2000s like female like singer-songwriter songs that me and Yannick, my best friend, have like had listening parties to. So like Love Song by Sarah Bareilles is a
Ah,
great song. You
nice.
know what I mean? And
Yeah,
that's a total guilty pleasure.
right.
Um, you know, yeah, I would say me and Yang grew up listening to some of the script
Oh,
stuff,
okay.
kind of, trying to relate that to a non-existent relationship that we didn't have with girls, you know what I mean? And try, and so you'd hear the script and be like, oh, this is totally how I feel, and completely unrelated, but so yeah, that used to be a guilty pleasure, but yeah.
Mm. If you had to put together an all-star band, all-star prog rock band together, and you had the superpower of bringing musicians back to life, who would you like to be a part of this dream ensemble of yours, Nick?
Okay, am I playing drums or am I the manager of the band?
You get to play the instrument as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Because I mean, if I was just a man, I'd kick myself out and get somebody else to do it. But if I'm playing drums and we're a prog band, I mean, I think on bass I'd put Justin Chancellor from Tool.
Okay.
He's one of my favorite bass players, and I think he's just, you know, the parts he comes up with are just great, and I love the way he feels, feels his instrument and just feels music in general. Um, Honestly, keyboard players, I'm putting Tony Banks on keyboards. Like
Mm,
he's, I mean, he's a complete genius, and the parts he's come up with and that he's written, like, as much as I've got to play with Genesis, and as much as it's like, my dad's, band that he was in, I'm also just a big fan of theirs. So,
okay.
I love Tony Banks, and so I would put him on keys.
Mm.
Um, this is. Yeah, this is a tough question. I mean, on guitar, there's a couple. I mean, I it's not necessarily prog, but I
Mm.
love Eddie Van Halen as a guitar player.
Okay.
I love Jimmy Page.
Mm.
I love so many. I love John Frusciante. I'd probably, you know what? I'd probably go Jimmy Page on guitar because I think he was just such a great riff writer, and he went from doing classic rock stuff to like super prog stuff as well,
Mm.
in some of the Zeppelin songs. So yeah, I'd go Jimmy Page on guitar, and then vocals. You know, this is a tough one. Um, I would maybe go. I'd maybe go like again, I don't know how prog it is, but I would maybe go Chino from Deftones, Chino Moreno.
Okay.
He's one of my favorite singers as well, and I just think he's got a great, um, just great, instinct for melodies and parts, and his sound is great. So yeah, I don't know. That'd be an interesting band.
Yeah,
I don't know what
crazy.
we would write. It'd be very, very avant-garde. I don't know
Totally.
what would happen, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's always
Massive
hard to
sound.
put
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always hard to put those kinds of all-star bands together because there's just so many guys you can pick from.
Right. Right. If you were teaching a masterclass, hypothetically titled Why This Drum Part Exists, what's the single Better Strangers song you'd use to prove that drums are compositional and not decorative?
Um, that's a really interesting question. I think that there's a couple songs that aren't released yet, but for the ones that are out, I would say there's a song called Sleepwalking,
Okay.
which is off of our recent live EP.
Hmm.
Um, and that one I think was very intentional in a lot of ways, but like I said, it was still a response to the music. So that's the song that's in a lot of it is in seven. Um, but I think it's cool that there's a couple parts where it goes from being 7/8 to 7/4. So despite it still being seven, the feel gets changed, and I think that's a really kind of cool way to intentionally affect the way a song or a part is going to feel. So yeah, I would say that one was probably one that, it's a drum part that I'm proud of, and a drum part that I put a lot of kind of work into. So I'd probably go with that one.
For the people of India, if you had to tell us a very fond anecdote, uh, that a lot of people might not be aware of, in terms of performing with your dad, what might that be?
Like in relevance to India or just in general?
No, just in general. Yeah.
Like an anecdote of performing with my dad. I mean, we spoke about me messing up on the on the keyboards. I mean, that was a pretty big one. I mean, I think, one of the best memories that I have, I'd probably say was from the last show that I did with him, which
Okay.
was the last Genesis show. It was just a really special night. It was very emotional and weird night in a way, because Taylor Hawkins had passed away the night before.
Yeah.
And so I woke up to the news that had happened. So I was just really kind of, you know, was unstable probably that
Mm,
day, and also in the fact that it was the last show.
mm,
So it was quite emotional, but that was, to get to experience not only, there was me playing drums and I was stoked that I, did it, and as an accomplishment of having done this, it was great. But to take a step back from that and to really just enjoy the show, we had family there, to enjoy the show for like my dad, Tony, and Mike as friends, as bandmates for 50 years, to kind of take a step back from that and kind of go like, this is so amazing that these people 50 years later
mm,
have an arena full of people who have just celebrated their music, and they've gone out on their own terms and gone out on a high doing, not a lot of bands get to finish still doing arenas. And then obviously for my dad, like that was his last show, and what a kind of way to end it. What a career. And we'd have moments throughout the set where we had one song, Home by the Sea. He'd come and sit next to my drum riser and kind of watch me. I remember the first night he did that, I thought he was going to start taking notes and sending me some critiques for after. But then I realized he was just doing that. It was a change of scenery, and it was a moment that we would share of him just watching me play drums. So that was always a kind of emotional thing. So yeah, the last show has got some really kind of great fond memories for me. And then Peter Gabriel was at that show, so he came backstage afterwards, and we were just all hanging out and talking. So it was just a really kind of great vibe and atmosphere that night.
marvelous. Such a beautiful memory that you'd forever cherish for the rest of your
Mhm.
life. Very, very, very glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing it.
No, of course. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. If you had to describe your experience being on my show, Stalwarts of Music, how would you describe it?
No, I think it was great. I've had a great time. I appreciate you. You're very professional. You come in with really good questions that haven't just been asked before. Like, it's the amount of times I've heard questions just like, what's it like having Phil Collins as your dad? Like, so to actually have somebody do their research and come with really kind of questions that make me think, and I think it was very good. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Nick. It gives me a lot of happiness and pleasure because all of you, as musicians from across the world, add meaning to my pursuit as a music journalist, and I think the beauty lies in me trying to unveil to the people of the world a lot more about the musician than the music that they hear every day. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's great.
One last question for today. Down in the distant horizon, what would you like to be remembered as?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I mean, at the end of the day, I just want to, be a part of, whether it's write songs or just to be a part of something that impacts people in a positive way,
Okay,
and that hopefully, kind of inspire, some drummers along the way in different ways. Um, whether that's inspiring them to try and be creative, to try and chase their dream, or to push in a certain direction. I think, any way that I can help um, contribute the same way that so many great drummers contributed to my upbringing as a drummer, to be a part of that and to is that's a huge honor. The to I know the impact that drummers have had on me, so to even have a ounce of that for somebody else would be a huge honor.
that's a great answer for a closure. This interview will be aired on the Sunday primetime radio show on 98.3 Big FM Shillong and 92.7 Big FM Aizawl, two incredible radio stations in the northeastern part of India. It'll also be out on my YouTube channel Aditya Veera 1994 at a later point, and also be out on all streaming platforms. Thank you so much, Nick. It's been such an incredible blessing, honor, and a privilege to have you on the show.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do it again soon at some point.
Certainly, certainly. I would be happy to also have you in India. If there's a way I can connect you with some concert promoters out here, I would be happy to, because this podcast has opened doors for a lot of musicians to come down to India, and if that can happen, I would be more than happy to help you out there. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. No, thank you very much. Appreciate that.